Hello and good morning. So I think it's fair to say that the series that we love takes a slightly unconventional approach to storytelling. Obviously there's been discussions every now and then on different timeline theories and that sort of thing, and the odds of us actually getting any official confirmation on this, that, or the other on this whole situation is probably next to none, so I guess all theories are more or less fair game, but I just wanted to put another alternative out there for anyone that might be interested in this sort of thing. I guess this is sort of halfway. This is very similar to the one that TBM had out there. However, we have some differences of opinion on where and when the timeline splits exactly. Technologically, he had a good point as far as what's developing where at what time, but as far as the order that it all takes place in and the reasons behind some of it, that's something that I wanted to dive into a little. So without any further ado, let's start over here at the very beginning. So I agree that 4 definitely seems like the actual logical start point for the whole thing. Nations are still around at that point. Sorry, didn't mean to zoom in there. Yeah, nations are still around at that point. Actually, kind of a funny thing to note, all 3 of these ACs are identical. Way to go, marketing department. So, yeah. They're still around. In general, there's actual regulations going on the ACs themselves. They kind of understand that there's danger behind the whole, nuclear friggin' Kojima thing. And yeah, they know it's irradiating cities and everything else, but they're trying to control it. They think that they can control it and all that. So, as long as nations are around, it doesn't get to be too big of a thing. They can't use it in certain places. Just in general, there's more of a understanding as far as it's it's not something you want around too much. Now, by the end of AC4, obviously nations are gone, corporations are starting to completely take over, and well, stuff starts getting awry. So all those regulations go away, and that's when we get into 4 Answer. So by the end of 4, the most advanced thing they have around is that Aretha thing. And it's just kind of an experimental thing. You don't see stuff get too crazy. Once those are gone, once the corporations take over, there's more of a huge expansion. Suddenly everything's going to outright war all the time. They're not limited by those same rules. And so you start seeing, the giant friggin' arms forts and things like that. You start seeing all the Nexts being used in more or less normal areas. Stuff's gotten polluted to the point that half the population went up to the frickin' sky, and in general, stuff's just not looking too great. Well, I mean, the game looked pretty as all hell. I just mean in terms of a general survival-type scenario, stuff was not looking too good. But, yeah, this is kind of where the difference in theories starts to come in. Because, yeah, towards the end of it, there's obviously multiple endings. Personally, I think the ending that it goes for is irrelevant. Basically, no matter what, no matter whether it's the player going off and taking down the cradles, no matter if they eventually fall down themselves, no matter if, the friggin' satellite stuff happens, either way, they come to the ground. A bunch of time passes. Judging by the state that everything's in, I want to say it's around 80 years or so, something along them lines. New cities have been built up by the time of AC5. A lot of that old technology has been more or less squirreled away. Some of it's been, there were a lot of prototypes, obviously, that would have been developed at the time, and a lot of that would have been squirreled away, and I believe that's where a lot of these, these towers and things are, that they're more or less just all these different old prototypes and everything else. They're like, okay, we have all this crazy crap, let's just shove it in here, just put it in storage, whatever, this, wash our hands of this whole thing, try to restart society. So by the time of AC5, there's a, more or less a dictator that comes along, starts up a super city, starts up using one of these towers, and actually I believe he controls a few of them. And just in general, stuff is looking pretty darn Orwellian at that point. So, he's going and using all this stuff. There's a revolution, gets overthrown, and we sort of come to the end of 5 and then into Verdict Day. Because at the end of it, there's a guy, I believe it was Chief that does it, but basically one of the main characters from 5, kind of in the background, just wanders into one of those towers and decides he's going to stick around. he becomes implied to be the main bad guy, Verdict Day. So, by the time Verdict Day comes along, instead of one, massive nation state that's taking place there, it winds up being three corporations that more or less rule the world in a more or less mafia sense. They're less corporations; there's more of a straight up mafia. So they even one of them even calls themselves the Families. So, or the Evergreen Families, but so they basically just have a stranglehold on everything. They run everything. It's just perpetual war all the time. Again, that same kind of Orwellian thing. I want to say that 5 and Verdict Day got really heavily inspired by 1984. Again, three massive entities in a state of endless war for the sake of profit. Sounds about right. So yeah. They're just fighting and fighting and fighting, and in the background, the actual plot of Verdict Day is happening, wherein more and more machines are starting to come about because of this guy that wandered into one of those towers, and he's basically bringing back a lot of this old tech, all these AIs and things like that. All this old crap that was pretty much, supposed to be gone, supposed to be squirreled away. Somebody was thinking, okay, maybe someone will come along and use this responsibly, to which his answer is, no, let's just go ahead and end the Earth, more or less. And so yeah, he starts bringing the stuff back, and more of it comes out. By the end of Verdict Day, AIs are freaking out all over the place. This AI tech that's been out there is proven to be just completely corruptible. He's able to just control these AIs and turn them. And that's the first kind of sign that we start to see of, okay, they have this AI technology, but they didn't really think through the security very well. And so, their own AIs start getting turned against them. Though these three massive corporations just keep on fighting. That's all they know. They just know to fight each other. They don't even care about everything else. So when, at the end, Blacklint gets blown up, just brings back a straight-up Next, with a bunch of stuff hanging off of it. It's actually really cool looking. But, yeah, it's implied that he has an infinite amount of these things, just an infinite amount of friggin' super machines that have been squirreled away. Like, okay, I have all these AIs, we have all these super machines, and they just have a line at the very end of like, okay, we'll keep trying, we'll keep fighting these things, as long as we can. Like, okay, whatever, endless war, go for it. And that's actually, it's funny because it segues into the multiplayer, which basically consists of a constant, three-pronged war just kind of going against each other. And then they have these occasional machine fights that come out of nowhere, and usually players lose. Because those things are super powered as all hell, they're way harder than anything else you run into. And yeah, so that's the point at which I think it's a mix of humanity nuking itself back to the Stone Age and, well, those machines basically coming and annihilating everything. So, based on which person's talking, that gets different names, whether, it's an endless war, whether it's, the Great Destruction, 30-Year War, whatever. All of this stuff just gets lumped into different names. And I think that's actually where the timeline splits here. Because they still have that AI in the background. The guy running it... Oh, I just noticed the mouse is freaking out in the recording here. Well, that'll be hilarious. Well, so that AI is still in the background there. It's still doing things. But all it knows is to control things and fight things. Fair enough. We'll just go ahead and leave that be for now. So everyone goes underground. Earth is basically over. At this point, everyone goes underground, and then just basically comes with a decision, like, okay, so we didn't do a very good job here. Let's just have a computer run everything, alright? And that's what they end up doing. So, this is kind of where I believe the split happens. So, they make two versions. So they have 9-ball, basically, and they have Dove, aka the controller, which I was recently informed that Dove was the version that they went with for the Japanese version. It's the one that's on the emblem. I don't know why they didn't call it Dove. That sounds so much cooler. But so they have one that is based on control and one that is based on peace, more or less, which, again, explains the name Dove. I don't know if it actually stands for anything else. But going into going into the AC1 universe here. So stuff is generally regulated more along the lines of, okay, everyone's underground, we have to keep things pretty limited, you know, don't get anything too crazy going on, and so, you know, this stuff is generally pretty well regulated. There isn't a whole lot of movement extensions or things like that, because, again, they're just underground for all this. They don't really need all of it. So, you know, there's all that. So we have those same higher abilities that we end up seeing throughout the series, but they're accomplished through modifying people. So instead of modifying the machine itself, the person is modified themselves to somehow hook better into the machine. It's not expressly said how, presumably some kind of brain implant or something like that, because, I mean, the way that they show it seems to imply that they're actually connecting to the thing itself to be able to accomplish some of these stability feats. So, alright, so fair enough, you know, you get all those. And over on this side, with those two AIs, Nineball's the one that ends up winning. So one way or another, they're meant... I believe the way that it would be set up would be they would have one that's supposed to go take an active role in basically policing things, and like whenever there's somebody about to go start another war, they just go and take care of that problem, and that's basically that. It's supposed to keep the peace through that, whereas Dove is supposed to just keep stuff running in the background, just keep everything all nice and cozy, deal with outside threats. Whereas Nineball deals with stuff on the inside. So on this side, they don't actually get along. Nineball decides, okay, if it has to deal with all the threats, it can't have this other thing running stuff, and it absorbs it. It ends up winning it, absorbs it, and that's why you end up seeing both himself and a thing that looks a lot like the controller in that particular timeline. So he tries to do his whole policing thing, and, you know, first game, the controller thing gets blown up. So he's not feeling too great about that. Phantasma comes along, they're starting to experiment with, you know, with different things they can do with different machines. I don't believe it ends up affecting the plot that much. They do some new experiments, but, you know, the plot itself is generally unaffected. And then Master of Arena comes along, and Nineball has moved entirely into his unit. He doesn't want to leave something stationary after what happened to Dove, and, you know, he ends up getting himself terminated as a result. Probably on account of him deciding to go show up and police the world himself. So yeah, we got this one with all of them sweet arena fights, and it doesn't end too well for Nineball. And then we get a bunch of extra fights, but we're not going to go into those. So, ends up getting defeated by Leos. So, he ends up deciding going, and he decides to go take some of this old tech and stuff with him, go to the moon. You know, he's going to go and he's going to figure out this thing that Nineball failed to do with trying to keep everybody in check. He likes the idea, he didn't like the implementation. Well, he tries it, you know, puts out his disorder units, which are more or less just more of this old technology crap. Doesn't exactly end up going too hot for him. He ends up getting killed off, and then we just move into bonus content over here, and that's basically the end. You know, both the AIs have been dealt with. Humanity's more or less gone back to a kind of stable government-type system, and the corporations don't end up getting as powerful as they do in the other timelines. So they end up stabilizing, and stuff's pretty alright, you know? Everything works out pretty decently. So that's, I believe, the good ending of the series, or one of the good endings. So, next we move down here. So, over here, Dove is the one that ends up winning between the two AIs. It ends up absorbing Nineball and throwing his husk aside to be found in Nexus later. Basically just uses him as a bouncer, more or less. So, similar type scenario. They're living underground. Basically, we're going to assume more or less the same place, just with a different name. I like to think it's one of those towers that had all the subterranean stuff already built, that they just kind of found and moved humanity into. You know, maybe it was built as an emergency failsafe of some description and the inevitability of the world ending itself. Who knows? But in this case, Dove ends up taking over, and everything's pretty peaceful at first. But then it starts malfunctioning. Stuff is generally more regulated, but due to the fact that there's more corporate control and everybody's fighting each other, and the AI is not so concerned about the people fighting each other so much as outside stuff, they allow some extra stuff, extra movements, different kinds of abilities and all that. They allow some of it to stick around, but they don't go as crazy as as For Answer did. And, you know, AC3 ends, and there's more regulations put in place. Because at the beginning of Silent Line, you find out, yeah, okay, so all this war broke out over this whole thing. We need to severely limit the kind of parts that are available. You know, stuff did not go great. So there's kind of a general consensus between the different corporations there of like, okay, we gotta control this stuff. There's too much power floating around, and we gotta keep this in hand. So they do. Over the course of Silent Line, it ends up getting reintroduced over and over. But it doesn't... there isn't as much of a, you know, here's all these massive things you can do kind of a situation. And at the end, they get rid of the secondary AI. Again, just kind of remnants of Dove, more or less. Because it's dealing with outside threats, so it's got its satellites and everything, it's got its different machines all over the place, and these are just leftovers. I consider it more of a mop-up than anything else. It's got one of the leftover prototypes for MB left over, which probably looks a lot like Ibis. Maybe it's just a reference, maybe it's one of his husks, who knows. It looks like an experimental version of Seraph, because Seraph doesn't properly show up. So I'm going to say that he was like a prototype version of Seraph. Now, at this point, I think it splits again, because after Silent Line, either stuff worked out and people managed to figure out, hey, let's be reasonable about this, or it doesn't. So, once we get into Nexus, we get Navis. So now, let's go into the bad route, first of all. Those beautiful heat mechanics. So I think what happened with this one, a bunch of regulations were put in place after Silent Line. They didn't want anybody being able to do that kind of stuff again. But they started severely limiting parts. They started running into resource shortages, and that's why we start to see a lot of the heat mechanics. Again, this might just be, you know, them playing around with stuff, but I like to think of it as, at the start of Nexus, you see a lot of resource wars and stuff going on. So there's clearly a shortage. I like to think, you know, they ran into some kind of issues with some type of insulating material that they needed, and it just wasn't around. So all the parts were rebuilt from before. They tried to rebuild them. They just made them crappier because they, you know, they either lost the original schematics, they didn't really know what was going on. Maybe they, you know, so there was a big amount of peace in between these, so it's just kind of assumed, okay, you know, they just dug this crap up out of nowhere. And they didn't exactly rebuild it as well. So, at the end of Nexus, they end up finding all this old tech, and Navis ends up going and poking it with a stick, because that's what you do with old angry technology that completely wiped out a thing. And they keep repeatedly doing this, and repeatedly doing this, and repeatedly angering this giant old AI god underground. Well, that ends up going fantastically, and then Last Raven happens. So, due to the escalating situation, and due to the fact that the world almost ended, they end up improving all their parts as much as they can. Again, they're still dealing with resource shortages at the time, so they can really only improve them so far. But at the end, you know, we know what ends up happening. Basically, all the Ravens are gone, all the pulverizers are gone, all of the friggin' old machines and old tech and stuff is gone. It is what it is. So it tries to come back, ends up failing. Dove is very dead at that point. And then Nineball just kind of comes out, pokes his head out every now and then, but he's basically a husk. He's just there as an automated defense thing. Yes, in the Japanese version, he's just question mark, question mark, question mark. I like to think he was just kept around as a husk. He was just an extra unit. He was slightly better than some of the other ones. He just kind of was placed over to be a defensive thing. So corporations take over, and yeah, stuff's all depressing and Orwellian in this ending. Generally not very fun at the end, but at least all the friggin' crazy machines are finally gone. And then down here we have the reasonable ending. So they see all this old technology and whatever else, and they just basically decide to seal it off. They're like, okay, we have seen the world end a couple times now. Just keep it underground. Who even cares? Just nuke it, seal it up, who knows? But yeah, they decide to go and study some of the AI patterns, study what they can do with builds. They decide not to go all crazy with digging up old technology, and, you know, Ninebreaker is just it's just testing. They're looking through different stuff, and finally it culminates in Formula Front, where they decide, you know what? All this testing was cool. Maybe, instead of massive world wars, we can just make it into a sport. And so they do, and this is the happy ending. So, in short, yeah, stuff's all dandy and normal in this ending. So, the old tech is basically just eliminated or ignored. The Dove is gone and replaced with, presumably, more modulated systems that don't have as much control over stuff. Nineball is around, but he's just, he's a toy. I mean, they basically say he's a relic of the past. So, he could have easily been just like some random husk they found lying around at this point and remade for fun. There is a sort of cooperation between government and corporate entities in this one. And you see that by, you know, they get all this branding, and if they're needing branding, they probably have some sort of government regulating it all. But, yeah, that's as far as I see it. That's the timeline that makes sense. Down here, yeah, there were, you know, there were some mobile games and books and stuff like that, but they basically took place around here-ish. I don't know what the whole deal was with apparently some whole subplot about targeting torsos, but whatever. So, you know, let me know what you think. I think this is a pretty reasonable type situation as far as the timeline goes. It's just a personal one I've kind of taken a liking for a while now. You know what? Come to think of it, I might just leave that crazy mouse spazzing in the background. That is hilarious. We'll see. Yeah, if I end up cutting it out, there's just basically 7 or 8 versions of the mouse now that are just spazzing out all over the place in the background of this video. Yeah, that's funny looking. Whatever, we'll see. So, you know, let me know what you think, and, yeah, hopefully this was interesting to someone. Have a good day.